Question, am I personally responsible for the taxes owed by my limited liability company? Should I have started a corporation? We made good money until the economy collapsed. I probably spent more than I should, but I didn't see the collapse coming. None of us did. I owe taxes and I just can't pay them. What can I do?
This is an interesting question. The reason why is because limited liability companies are taxed as though they're partnerships. So any income that the limited liability company made was attributed directly to this taxpayer. So if this person was, let's say, not in the form of a limited liability company, but in the form of a corporation, and they didn't draw the corporate profits out either as dividends or as salary, or as a return on capital or some other way, and the money was left in the corporation, and the corporation accrued an income tax liability, then they would not be responsible for that corporate income tax liability. But since they were an LLC or a limited liability company, they accrue all the tax liability, all the income tax liability personally. So if that's the case, now they have a tax liability and they have to address that liability through a variety of collection matters. This question also is a little bit vague and may also imply that this limited liability company had payroll or had employees. Now, if this limited liability company accrued payroll tax liability, then the individuals who own the company do not need to pay back the entire tax liability in most cases. They're only going to be responsible to pay back the portion that was actually withheld from the employee's wages. That's called the trust fund portion, because the portion being withheld from the employee's wages is being held in trust by the corporate owners and is supposed to be paid over to the IRS in the form of a federal tax deposit. So if they got hit with the trust fund portion liability, then they do have to pay it back, or they have to settle it in some way. And that's either going to be through an offering compromise, installment arrangement, or a hardship status.
You know, and we get lots and lots and lots of questions from folks who have a business, were in business, and because of the declining economy, they've either declared bankruptcy or just folded up the corporation. And this trust fund on payroll is kind of confusing, and it's a real big deal, but what it boils down to is you pay an employee $100, you're holding $20 of that 100 in trust that really you owe the government. It ain't your money. It was the employee's money that you're obligated to send to the government. So the IRS views that totally differently than the income tax you'd have paid on the business.
Yeah, absolutely. What happens, and that's a very good example you made, True. What happens is that if you have an employee that gets $100 in salary, the employer is designated to withhold, let's say, for example, $20 of that 100. The employee takes a paycheck of $80. When employees get their paycheck, they can see all the different various deductions that come out of their paycheck. A lot of that's the trust fund portion. A lot of that's being withheld by the employer, and that money is supposed to be sent along to the IRS in addition to something called the employer's matching contribution, in addition to an additional tax the employers have to pay for the right to have employees. Now, the employers become personally responsible from only the money that was withheld from the employee's wages, and that the general formula for that is about 2/3. So if a company has, let's say, a $30,000 payroll tax debt, about $20,000 of that $30,000 is going to be trust fund portion, and that's the amount that's going to be assessed personally against the responsible parties or the owners of the company.
And so folks understand that it doesn't matter what structure your business is. You could be a limited liability company, a corporation, a partnership, even a sole proprietorship. This income tax on payroll is something you're going to be held accountable for. So if you happen to be in business and your situation is, I can't make payroll and hold that money out, you're going to have to figure out a way to make that all work, because that money will get paid somehow.
Well, for general partnerships and for sole proprietorships, the owners of those business entities are not responsible for only the trust fund portion. They're responsible for the entire liability, the trust fund portion plus the employer's matching contribution. So if you're running a partnership or you're running a sole proprietorship and you have a $30,000 payroll tax liability, you're personally responsible for the entire $30,000. People who are operating under a corporate structure or an LLC will only be responsible for the trust fund portion, and therefore probably only responsible for 2/3 of the total tax due.
You know, and in this economy, folks that are in business and have been in business a long time, it's probably a real good idea to do a contingency plan on what am I going to do if I just can't keep my business open, because that's not something you think about when you're in business. I have a little kind of a side business. Mine's no big deal. But I have been thinking lately, what's going to happen if I lose 2 or 3 clients and that income's not there anymore? Just be sure that you're not in a position where all of a sudden you personally owe the IRS thousands of dollars and you just don't have any money.
Right, absolutely. And that's why I prefer the corporate structure or the LLC structure to operate a business. One, it minimizes the entire payroll tax obligation if the business does go under. And if the business starts to go under, it's a good idea for employers, if they can, and they can do so ethically and with fiduciary responsibilities, if they can designate more money, at least to the trust fund portion of the tax. When they make a federal tax deposit, they can designate right on the check for trust fund portion only to make sure that that deposit gets applied only to the trust fund portion. So if the business eventually goes under, if the trust fund portions are paid but the employer's matching contributions are not, they won't be personally responsible for any payroll tax. That's a very likely result. And that's the kind of advice that we as tax attorneys in the tax attorney profession, we give all the time to corporations that are experiencing corporate payroll tax delinquencies.